again, everybody, and welcome to episode 18, the Peyton Manning edition of Angles and Attitudes. He's John and I'm Mark, and today we're joined by Fox Sports five-tool guy. NFL, check. MLB, check. NASCAR, check. Boxing, and just for good measure, Westminster Kennel Dog Shows. Please welcome to the podcast, Chris Myers. Chris, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on. It's nice to talk to you guys.
Well, we appreciate having. We watched some of the Christian Tells, and I also saw some of the play at home. So I don't have the official Bob Barker play at home microphone for today, but
I did bring the old. I have. It's not hooked up, so I hope you can hear me. I'll give away prizes later for being on this show. But I used to walk around as a kid. I walk around the neighborhood with one of these trying to interview people, and they sent me away. So
all right. Well, we'll start from a kid, and I know your time is valuable. We appreciate you jumping on. So we're going to fast forward a little bit. We're going to pick it up at ESPN. After some time in Miami, you find yourself working for ESPN. Tell us some stories from there.
Well, a lot of story. It was a story. They saw me doing a feature on the college baseball team at the World Series, and coaches on a staff of an NFL team who never played the game but were coaching the game. And that's how I got my hire there. I was a West Coast reporter. It was my first gig in 1989 with ESPN, and so they were starting at that, believe it or not, beginning bureaus. They were going to start a New York bureau, eventually a Chicago bureau of reporters, because they really just had anchors in Connecticut who did highlights. Chris Berman, the guys going back then. And it was great to be a part of an all sports network after having done sports for local news and things like that. So I had a lot of my first year. My God, the events that happened today. I was at the Earthquake World Series with the A's and the Giants. I was in the middle of that. And at what was the Giants home park at the time when it happened. I was there. They said, get on a plane, go to Dallas. This crazy Arkansas oil guy is going to buy the Cowboys, and he may fire Tom Landry. I jumped on a plane. I covered there with Jerry Jones, took over the Cowboys, and then drafted Troy Aikman. And then there was great history through that. So as a reporter moving around a lot, that was a lot of fun. And then I did a story on a relief pitcher, Tim Burke. I don't know if you guys remember him. He was with the Montreal Expos. He was with some other teams, but and he was named to his first All-Star game. Buck Rogers was the manager. They were then the Expos, and they were in contention. But he made his first All-Star game, but him and his wife could not, I guess, biologically have a child. So they were going to adopt a child. And the paperwork, they would have to go into the jungle of Guatemala to both be there and signed at a certain time to pick up the baby, the adoption. And he was pitching in the All-Star game, and I was covering the All-Star game in Anaheim. It's the one that Bo Jackson hit the long home run in. And they said, hey, you know what? Lasorda's going to let this guy pitch and then get on a plane to go. You should follow him, and it'll be a story for SportsCenter. So I did that. We went down into the jungle, and we adopted it. It was so emotional. The kid, they flew back, and then he pitches. He gets back just in time. He pitches in the All-Star game, and then he pitches for the Expos in a game that he actually saves as he flies back, lands that day. And the rest was history. So anyway, that story won an Emmy, a national Emmy. It was really the first reporting Emmy known for ESPN. And so from there, I was brought back to the home office and started doing some sports centers and Baseball Tonight and that type of thing. So that's kind of an early beginning of ESPN, how stories unfolded. There were a lot of other things that I covered, including Hank Gathers, the basketball player, having a heart attack on the court down at Loyola Marymount, and the fact that you're in the mix with some of those things, and they're different stories because I had to go to the hospital with the family, and we all kind of found out at the same time that he'd actually passed away. He was a young, healthy athlete. And so the question was, should he have been playing? Did they know about it? So there's always a sports story, but a news story, I think, connected to a sports story. It's one of the fascinating things about what we do in live sports. So anyway, those were some of the early ESPN connections, along with some really cool people that I worked with behind the scenes and some nice people on the scenes.
Chris, I got to ask. I got to ask you, I mean, how did you feel about being put into this fire right away? I mean, you know, like you said, you got on a plane, a Landry, you did the thing with Burke
Yeah.
and everything. I mean, what was going through your mindset? Is this going to be an everyday thing, or were you thought you were going to be regulated to that studio?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. When I was the reporter, I thought, oh, I'm going to be out there on the West Coast covering, you know, whether it's the Dodgers or the Giants or, you know, that part of the region, or the West Coast football teams, the 49ers, whatever else was going on. And all of a sudden, these other kind of bigger stories came up and you get thrown into it. But I think you react, you know, you just you have to almost remove yourself as a sports fan, and you're becoming kind of a news guy or reporter guy. But I think you're asking the questions that people at home would want to know, or trying to tell the story that way. And even though there were different kinds of stories, some were emergencies, some were emotional, they all had kind of that common sports thread, which I think was cool. And that's why I got into it. I actually got into sports to have fun and call games and talk to athletes and that type of thing. And then, so this was, I think it helped prepare me later for calling play-by-play on broadcast, or for doing interviews, because of the different unique experiences that I was involved in. I have to interview the commissioner after an earthquake World Series and say, are we going to continue? We got to cancel a World Series? We're going to play a World Series? You know, how serious is the damage in the area? Anyway, those are some of the things. But yes, you kind of react. I mean, that's what you have to do. And I think each time your level of experience, you become a little bit more familiar. So I think you can handle it a little bit better.
Well, we appreciate that. And you bring up the idea, you got to be able to walk that line where you can't be too sportsy in a situation that has news element to it. And you can't be too newsy if there's the sports, and it's sports and we're supposed to enjoy it. Right.
Right. And I think through it all, really, the most amazing thing is the human element, right? I mean, people talking, what we're doing here, that really is the core. When I look back at, as a sports fan, a sports fanatic, studied the stats and watched the games, but I was the kind of guy stayed up late night to watch any interview show, whether it was Johnny Carson, or I would get home from school, and if baseball wasn't on, WGN, and I wasn't watching the Cubs, and then I'd watch I'd watch a Mike Douglas or a Merv Griffin interview show. And I think the interviewing of people, the conversation of people, which is why later I did Up Close that Roy Firestone started, and still enjoy doing those kinds of things. I think that's really at the core of whether it's a news story, a sports story, a human interest, or whatever it is. And I think I've always enjoyed that, coming from a big family, and having time to talk, or having to work my way in to the conversation.
Was there any personal favorite of yours, like if it was baseball tonight, Up Close with Firestone, or just doing the let's say the call of a game? Was there still, even to this day, the one that you say, oh wow, this is what I still like to keep doing?
Yeah, no, I think, well, I grew up kind of, football was my first passion, because I was around the Don Shula Dolphins of the 70s, that perfection kind of thing. But that was just the beginning. I mean, then I would hang out in spring training as a kid in Vero Beach, or the teams in South Florida. So I got to see a lot of different kinds of baseball. As far as what I've done, I always look at, I think John mentioned in the open, I look for new challenges after having been in the business a while, along with appreciating. That's why I did the Westminster Kennel Club Dog Show. I'm really, a fan. I always had dogs around my family, and I've never shown them or had them in shows or trained them, but I'm a dog lover, and I had to learn. It was really kind of an exciting like you would cover any other sport. You have somebody who's been involved in it as your analyst, and then you study the rules, the regulations, and you bring out what you think the viewer finds interesting. So I've enjoyed all this stuff. I mean, covering Super Bowls, having been on the field for when Brady, came back and led the Patriots against the Falcons, and the greatest comeback ever in a Super Bowl. Even just recently, getting to be on the sideline for the Chiefs when Patrick Mahomes, before they lost to the Bucs the year that they beat the 49ers, and have Andy Reid interview him. There's those kinds of moments that stick with you. I love calling NFL games, but I like talking to people about sports. So, and the live, unscripted part of sports, and what we're doing here too, that it's not tape delayed. There's not a second take. You do it and react to it. Kind of like those news stories. Even when the Red Sox broke through in 2004, the Cubs in 2016, the White Sox in 2005 have been around on a network broadcast of those moments, whether you're a fan of those teams or not. But to see those players and the fans of those players react at something like that stays with you more than almost the job. But at the moment, you got to do the job. So, but to me, it's all fun. It never gets old, because you're a sports fan at heart.
Well, that's where we kind of came from too. Just we've been amazed talking to guys like you We had Diane Burns from Channel 7, Emmy Award-winning news anchor, Mark Greco, and just had Chip Carey earlier in the week. And the thing that we've taken away is the human element. Because we see you on TV, or we see you as kind of quote unquote celebrities, we get a chance to talk to you about things like this. And it's like, I keep coming away going, these are just really, really, really cool people.
Yeah, I mean, you have to kind of like what you do, and you gotta like the people. Are gonna be like, everything's not gonna be perfect. You got to get along with people and make it work in your situation. I mean, I've had situations over the years, as great as some guys have been. People that have been very difficult to deal with. I mean, Barry Bonds, who just recently had a birthday. He ended up doing interviews and was cooperative. It was actually okay, but he was a difficult guy, even as great a player as he was. And you realize some people are just shy. He once told me, I wish I could just play baseball and not have anybody around. I mean, he said he was happiest when he was on his motorcycle, riding up and down the coast alone and feeling free. So you get to the end, you get to these moments with people and you understand a little bit more about them. But yes, if you enjoy what you do, then I think you're going to be happy going to work.
Chris, I got to say one thing here before I take it over to Mark. 3 interviews that stick out in my mind with you that I thought you handled unbelievable. Where's the Bonds one? I love the one with John Wooden, and of course, I think you had O.J. Simpson flustered. I don't want to go to that, but it was like you were the lawyer and he didn't know how to answer you. That was my take on that interview, and you handled that so good. And we're talking now 30 years ago.
Yeah, thank you for that. No, and that was amazing how the O.J. Simpson interview even came to be, and it's still, people can watch it, on YouTube from the up close in the late '90s. You're right, that was like '98. It was the first live interview with him after both, the wrongful death lawsuit and the murder trial, which he was acquitted. But I tell you, studying for that, and that was again a live interview. That was his only. He wanted to be on the show, and we had talked to him before all of this happened, before he was going to come on and just talk about his career. And then, of course, he goes, so years later, after he goes through the trial, him and his attorney say, Chris, I like the way you do interviews. We're fair. I want to come on your show as long as it's live. And they have two restrictions, actually. It's got to be live, and you can't ask about my children. I said, well, that's fair enough. I said, but just be aware, I'm going to talk to you about this trial. It's just happened. And most people think you're guilty. The evidence is overwhelming. I said, I'm not going to be accused, but I'm going to ask questions that people want to ask. And he said, that's fine. And so it's supposed to be 30 minutes live, and it ended up going almost an hour live on the fly. They changed it, but I studied for that. I almost like you would a broadcast. I mean, I met with lawyers. I saw evidence actually that the jury couldn't see. I spoke to police investigators. So yeah, it was a lot of homework, but I didn't want to get too opinionated. I just wanted to ask the question, hey, are you capable of killing? I think that was as close as I got to saying.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you actually do it? Kind of a thing. And I wanted people to be able to tell that he was not truthful. It wasn't up for me to call him a liar. You could look at the evidence and see things. But what was stunning about that, and I don't know if we were live, so we hit the first commercial break showing pictures, talking about his wife being cut, his ex-wife. And he turns to me just casually, and it was like, oh, hey, I got a tea time out at Riviera. If you want to play some golf, we have an opening here. We need a fourth. And I'm like, who is this guy? What the hell? Yeah. How disconnected is he? And so I knew it would catch up with him, and karma eventually did. Whatever people.
An Alfred Hitchcock movie, yeah.
So yeah, no, really, it was very surreal. I still to this day think of, and I've never gone back to watch the entire interview myself, because there were moments I felt I could have been more aggressive or pressed him, but that wasn't my role. He's the only guest I never shook his hand on, and at the end of the show, and he of course said at the end, hey, it was great talking sports with you. That was his sarcastic remark. But my goal was to present what I could, ask him what I could, and let the audience decide whether they thought he was guilty or a fraud or a lawyer. I had lawyers tell me, don't do this, because he sounds like a lawyer. He'll make you look bad. He can spin his story as well as anybody. Anyway, it was a fascinating moment among the many interviews that happened live.
So you were talking about, you mentioned preparation. Do you do different preparation if you're calling a game, an NFL game, or you're on the sidelines, and from a sideline standpoint, you get 5 hits, a half or whatever, to try to get points in? Can you kind of walk us through the difference on that in terms of prep in a game day?
Yeah, there's really, if you're doing an interview, first of all, let's just say a lengthy interview, like a sit down half-hour show, that's a different kind of preparation because you almost want to let the guests talk, but you want to make sure you have a direction. You want to talk about their history. Do you want them to be topical? That it's a lengthy conversation. When you're preparing for a game, there's a difference in calling a game as opposed to the sideline reporting. Sideline reporting, there's probably 80% of the material you have, you're not going to end up using. The good sideline reporters, they stand out they studied, but in the flow of the game, that's where they shine. They tell you something that you didn't read during the week or you didn't see online before the game. They tell you an emotional reaction that has happened on the sideline, or you can't quote exactly. The NFL doesn't want you quoting exact comments, but you can gather, hey, here's why this guy isn't in the game. Or they'll update it, not just updating an injury, but having a little bit more information on, okay, that's the injury here. But last week in practice, this guy was injured. So that's where kind of the preparation comes in. If you're calling a game, it's a lot of numbers and stats that you have, and you can put them on a board. And then you also, with our meetings, I'll be working with Daryl Johnston this year for the NFL on Fox, and I've worked with him before. He's terrific, and he's an established broadcaster as well as he was a player with the Super Bowl Cowboys, and so you make sure your analyst, where he wants to go or how to play off him, so that you guys cover what's going on through the course of the game. So for calling a game, my preparation starts as soon as we finish one week. I'm on the plane ride home looking at the roster of the next game that we're going to do, because often we don't do the same team every week. But it keeps you interested in the game and the players in the league. It keeps you on top of things.
I appreciate you saying that, because Mark and I are new at this. And, I always tell Mark, hey, okay, what are we going to ask Mr. Myers? What are we going to ask Chris? What are we going to ask Jim Carrey? And the question, the interview doesn't always go the way you want it to. So I appreciate that, because an answer could lead to another subject. So thank you.
That's the best. I always learned that the best in doing interviews, the best answer you get is really the follow-up question. The initial question, it may be okay, but after somebody answers, there's always a follow. It could be as simple as "tell me more," or "why did you feel that way," or how did that come about, or why did you want to leave the team, or why was the coach so upset? Those kinds of it's the follow-up, and it really is listening to what the person has to say. And sometimes they don't want to say a lot, and you got to steer them in a different direction. Sometimes they want to tell stories, and you let them go.
That's why we do the interviews now, because our wives don't want to hear about us anymore. Want to talk to us. So,
yes, if you interview your wives, you better do your research. Well, I'll just tell you that.
Hey, we go from Sundays in September to Sundays in February. NASCAR on Fox. I see you sitting there with Michael Waltrip or DW or those guys. Talk us a little bit about dealing with NASCAR Nation versus the NFL and that product versus trying to bring NASCAR along into people who would be NFL fans.
Yeah, it's an interesting transition, because I'm now working with Jeff Gordon, I don't think he's going to be in the booth going forward, but he will be a part of, likely still a part of the show. Clint Boyer on the pre-race show, and that's my area, more the pre-race show, almost like the NFL pregame show. Calling the races is a different group for Fox, but it's not as mainstream. It's become more mainstream, but obviously football, baseball, basketball, these are things people grew up with. So NASCAR, I thought, and part of my job as the host was to make sure we keep the core audience and appreciate and know the sport of racing and the drivers, but make sure other people flipping channels, well, they don't have to be a gearhead. You don't have to know everything about how an engine works to still enjoy a NASCAR race. You could appreciate the personality of the driver. You could appreciate the skill set or the strategy of the pit crew, the timing of, do you gamble on the wear on tires, and if you have the lead and the gas fuel mileage, those kinds of things. So the strategy, but also personality, I think, are the things. And it was, people told me when I first started doing that, when Fox put me in that role, they said, oh, you're a football, baseball guy, just like you talked about the open different sports. And I was like, well, they said, this is a tough audience. They know and they've accepted me. They, after a certain, and I say that because there's that hardcore, NASCAR gearhead that they could take their engine apart and put it back together and tell you why it works or why it doesn't. And that's not really my role. I have a former crew chief for that, or I have a former driver or somebody that's in that role. My role is to do the television part of it and do what you said, to make sure people feel comfortable. You don't want to have people watching a broadcast, whether it's an interview or a sport, and have them feel like they're being left out, like we're too special for them, or we're too smart for them, and you don't have to dummy everything down either. But I think that's even how we approach, at least my approach has been on even football or baseball broadcast. The hardcore people are going to know it, but there's a mainstream. Think of talking to a 10-year-old or you're an 80-year-old grandmother, whatever the difference. That's kind of, your audience. So if you're going to say Tampa 2 defense, then make sure you explain it in a simple way, so you're not insulting the person who knows it. But you're making sure that somebody's not left out who thinks they know it, but they never really took the time to study it or have somebody who played or coached the defense tell you about it. So it's the same thing in terms of NASCAR, and I bring that up because that was part of the I think what Fox did so very well, and has become now the number one. Other networks carry it, but they've become number one clearly on the coverage of NASCAR, and the ratings have proved that. And it was one of the most important moves, the early sports to come back after the pandemic. Obviously, there were some factors there. We have a car and a driver, meant to be around people, but it was a very important thing for our country to get back to live sports, and they helped to do that. And it was nice that Fox was a part of that.
Even after all these years with going from the NFL on Fox to NASCAR, the Super Bowl, the Premier Boxing, does the names ever get confused? Just a quick question, because I want to bring it back.
No, they do. And it's funny. I do still practice when I'll go for a run or when I'm driving in the car. I'll go over names again. It's whether it's pronunciations, or I'll just attach names if it's a football game, or I'll attach names and numbers so that I make sure. And I try to compartmentalize a little bit. Okay. Right now, there's still some baseball and it's going to bleed over, but I'll be doing Buccaneers preseason football with Rondé Barber. So I got, the Bucks, I know their main core, but there's going to be preseason. There's a number of players and that are new. So I go over that. And if I do a new team in the NFL or a different NASCAR driver with a pit crew, you kind of have to program your mind. I mean, you can write things down, but I think you have to have familiarity to yourself. And sometimes my family gets tired of me. So I try not to do it with them when I'm at dinner or hanging out. They're like, why are you spouting out these numbers of players? Whatever. Let us watch the game. You just go. So it's just kind of a habit that I've been doing since I was a kid and a sports fan, that I've continued through my radio days and then through television. But yes, and sometimes you don't. This is the worst part, when you say a name and you don't even realize you said the wrong name. You want to say Justin Jefferson, and you might say John Jefferson, because you're thinking of an old Charger receiver or Packer receiver versus the new Viking receiver. So you have to catch yourself, and if not, hopefully people are listening to say, hey, and you correct it. Doesn't mean you didn't know it, but you got to make sure the audience gets it, hears you get it right.
All right, I want to go back to NASCAR, because to me it was great the way you were able to be the traffic cop on the Hollywood Hotel, because initially, even for me, on a Sunday, I'm like, well, that's Chris Myers. He's baseball and he's football. What's he doing with NASCAR with DW and with Jeff Hammonds and Larry Reynolds and cautions coming out and all this stuff? I'm like, what's Chris? And to just as a fan, I can watch now 3-4 years later and go, he's been there all along and he belongs there. So kudos to you for that. And give us a story when you got a rain delay in the Hollywood Hotel and you got to fill time and you don't know if the dryers are going and the drivers are drying by and they're making all kinds of noise and you're trying to tell a story. Give us one of those from like, oh my gosh.
We've had in the Hollywood Hotel was just for those that did, it was a little studio that it was on location. It wasn't like back in LA or New York. We were there at the track every week. So it was an advantage. You could walk right outside and watch the race or go into the pits or talk to the pit crew in between. And so it was a mini studio. And so when there were rain delays and we had live programming, we would often have drivers come in and talk to us, or we would just rerun certain segments of the race and talk about it. But there was one funny one, and I forget, I think it was in Virginia, rain delay. Jeff Hammond and I are in the little Hollywood Hotel, and it's pouring outside, and the pit reporters going back then, there was the late Steve Burns, great guy, Dick Berggren, who's the knowledgeable, I think, genies. I forget who the Matt Yoker was, and so they're out hustling to try to stay dry, and it's just pouring. We're talking about the challenge of doing a show in the rain, but we're sitting inside the studio. So and this is on live TV. Somebody got them these power super soaker squirt water guns, and all of a sudden they come storming in while Hammond and I are live on TV talking about, and they just start blasting away at us like we're in suits and ties and our TV And so I just, he rolls over in his chair but we were getting super soaked by them. It was just a moment that fans loved because it was so impromptu and out of character, that stood out to me, that kind of showed the great chemistry on that crew. So that was one of the funny moments. We've had a few more where some drivers were a little bit angry. I remember Tony Stewart, I brought up something about him being booed, and I think his mother or a family member had heard it, and they were upset about it. So when he came into, he was like, he didn't come in for an interview into the Hollywood Hotel. He came in to like straighten me out, as he put it rather angrily. And we did iron it out, and it really wasn't a problem. But there were a lot of those interesting moments. But you make a good point about, I think and we're all guilty of it. I think we label people how we saw them. Okay, you're a football guy. Oh, what's he doing on basketball? He's at basketball. Why is he doing golf? And really, I'm glad that fans have been more accepting, and the way the networks have allowed the transition to do a number of other sports. I mean, that's what makes Joe Buck and Jim Nance so successful. I mean, Joe can do World Series, or he can do a Super Bowl. Nance can do the Final Four of the Masters. And then you have your strength. You have obviously the sports that you're more passionate about or more comfortable in. But the audience knows you can do the job if you're committed at that particular time, which you have to be to do the job right.
You kind of remind me of the actor Robert De Niro in the sense of this. You're not going to remember De Niro for any one film, and you can't remember Chris Myers for anything, meaning you've done so much that it's just unbelievable, Chris.
Wow, compliment. I didn't know I had that kind of cachet, but thank you for that. But that's, I'm proud of that, because I wouldn't ever want to put one sport above another, or their fans. People go, oh, which sport do you like the most, or which one do you not like, or which one you haven't done? Look, there's a reason the sports are around, and people are passionate about that. I have certain ones that I connect to, just like over the years, there were certain players or people that you interview. I became good friends with people like Charles Barkley and Bill Murray and Troy Aikman, even before they were broadcasting or beyond their stardom careers and that type of thing. And there's a lot of other guys along the way behind the scenes that aren't necessarily headline names, that were really great people to talk to, and we've stayed in touch for various reasons. So I think that's a good. Look, I also respect broadcasters who are they want to stay on that one thing. That's all they want to do, baseball all the time, or they want to do football all the time, or soccer, or whatever it is. That's okay too. I probably, in the off season of that sport, like let's take the NFL in the off season, I'd get bored. I mean, as a fan, as a kid, I was like, all right, after football or whatever, I'm going to go enjoy baseball. I watch a little racing. The Daytona 500 would come on after the Super Bowl. Those are things you just kind of grow up and enjoy along the way. The NBA takes you through the summer, and the hockey playoffs, and that type of thing. So it's good that we have now too so many ways. You guys can do this podcast. We have regional sports. We have networks that are entirely devoted to one sport. I mean, I wouldn't take that for granted. I have to tell people that there was a time when that wasn't around. There wasn't an NFL channel and an MLB network that you could get, or your own team on every night. If it was a baseball channel like Marque Sports Network or something like that. So we should enjoy this while we have it, when we have it.
So one more from me on a wrap up, because you've been great with your time. But for local people, that's, I think, where that comes from, because there's that bias, right? We only see our local guy does baseball, and we only see him do baseball for us. And so, like, we could never think about when Eddie Olczyk went from hockey and started doing horse racing for NBC. So that, used to those types of things. So, but my last question, you've interviewed a lot of people. Somebody out there right now that you haven't been able to interview in celebrity, quote unquote, status, the entertainment, politics, or sports, that you'd really like to grab the Bob Barker microphone and do a
Wow. Well, the one guy I met that I would have loved to have interviewed is Johnny Carson, but that won't happen. I have met, Leno and Letterman and
I didn't know that.
And Kimmel. So yes, there you go. I did not know that. That is yes. Let me tell you that story real quick, because you guys can appreciate. There's a generation out there that think when I say Carson, they're thinking Carson Daly, but you guys get Johnny Carson, who was the king of late night and established. Real quick story. I grew up watching him, and I was a fan of his whole. I did not know that. So we're doing the late night Sports Center. This is in one of the ESPN books. Mike Tirico and I are filling the 2 a.m. segment. And at the end, we would have extra time, and Mike would throw out some fact or nugget, and I would do hey, I did not know that. So the producer said, why don't we just, create a segment and call it that? And I said, okay, well, we can't steal Carson's line. I did not know that. So we called it Did You Know? And for years, ESPN Sports had Did You Know? So I'm years later in LA at a tennis event, and Johnny Carson is over. He had retired from doing the show. He's over on the side by kind of in a private area. And I had like a media pass, and I'm like, boy, that's my guy. I want to meet him something, but I can't just. So I got up enough nerve. And I was still doing the Sports Center thing, but it just come out to the West Coast. And I got through and I said, excuse me for, he was sitting there watching. It was in between the match. I said, I'm sorry, Mr. Carson. My name is Chris Myers. I'm with ESPN. And he said, I know who you are. And I said, well, I'm sorry to bother you. I said, I just want you to know the Did You Know segment that we have on Sports Center. I said, that came from watching you and the way you react to people when you would say, I did not know that. And I said, it's become a kind of a popular thing. And I said, I just think it's kind of cool. And since I have the chance to tell you that, and I was kind of nervous. I interviewed everybody. I was never nervous before interviewing athletes, even in Ali or whoever. But I was nervous because this guy's one of my, and I said, I thought it was important to tell you that story. And this is a true story. He just looked at me and he went, I did not know that. And he walked away. And that was a true story. So Chris, anyway, funny.
Chris,
didn't need to ramble on that.
Here. Chris, I want to just say, on behalf of Mark and myself, of course, I got a hold of you in a sense through Boom Boom Mancini, through Ray. And of course, Ray speaks about you so highly. And I have to tell you, when you called me to come on Angles and Attitude after I had emailed you, in this 25-minute segment, I've learned a lot. I know Mark we're crazy about you for coming on. You've been so gracious. You are somebody that really speaks from the heart. And this is something that I'm never going to forget. And I hope we have another chance with you. Mark gets to see on the Marquee Network because he's Cubs, I'm Sox. And we love your Chris. We love your Chris and Tell thing. We would love to be on there one time. That is unbelievable.
All right. I'll get you on. We'll make Frank Thomas and Hanging with Hurt. We'll make them jealous if I get you guys on.
Yeah, we got to make him jealous for sure.
But I appreciated your note, your letter about, I get a lot of, requests for interviews and for doing podcasts. And it really, I don't want to be rude to anybody. There's just so many, but your letter was sincere. And I can tell you it was a genuine, we would have fun talking. And we did. So I'm glad to do it. I'll do it. I'll do it again. I do want to mention, and I think it was, it might've been Mark who made the comment about it. It's a really good point too, that I think, and I hope fans understand that, when somebody's doing a national broadcast versus a local broadcast, there's a big difference, right? When you're the local guy, you should be kind of rooting for that home team, right? Whether it's Cubs, right, White Sox, that's got to be clear. On a national scale, we really, even though we get a lot of people upset thinking we're rooting for one team or another, when we're doing that, you really don't. When you're doing a national game, you're really just rooting for a good game. You want a close game, a competitive game, a good game. And so, but there's a difference in there. So some people can transition easy out of that as broadcasters. Sometimes the audience isn't as forgiving, but hopefully they're more aware because you guys brought it up. I thought it was a very good point. But my pleasure talking to you. This was a lot of fun.
We appreciate your time. Take care, Chris.
All right, you guys take care.
See you soon, Chris.
Alrighty.